The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to The Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I am your host, Bobby Williams. Please subscribe to the show, give us a follow. Each month you'll get a new episode. Today we're talking about supporting children with autism. Our guests are Cheryl Vandegrift and Allyx Steffens. Cheryl has a psychology degree and has been diagnosed with autism herself. Her sister Allyx is an early childhood education development specialist and has a son with autism. Together, they are taking their collective knowledge and using it to create tools that families can use to support their children. I went into this interview thinking that I knew a lot about autism, that I maybe wouldn't learn that much, and I ended up learning a whole lot. I think you're really going to like this episode. Check it out.
Out of nowhere, she sent me this text that everything was backwards for her. And she said, all of this psychology stuff is backwards for me. And neither one of us really knew what she meant. And so we've been working for the last 6 months, developing and working on the autistic Maslow's triangle based on Cheryl's idea from several years ago in psychology courses that it was backwards for her. And we didn't quite know what that meant. And so we've gone live with it at the end of May.
So I'm assuming you're figuring out what it means, though. Can you explain what your version looks like?
Yes. So in the normal one, the foundation is, things that you need in order to keep going and be a better person and reaching your goals is the foundation. But in the autistic one, the foundation is more personal. So they don't necessarily need the clothing. A lot of them would be like, I can't find comfortable clothing. That's fine. I'm going to go throughout my day and keep going. It's only society that tells us, no, you can't keep going without clothing. If they don't have their safe foods, they'll leave behind their safe foods and they'll just keep going with their day. So it looks different for them. So at the bottom is actually like self-actualization and boundaries, things that neurotypicals don't usually have until the top of the pyramid when everything else has been satisfied. They start out with their self and taking care of themselves, and then everything else falls into place. And at the top is actually thriving. So a lot of the families are just existing. They're just, waking up and just trying to get through the day to go to sleep and start all over again. Like that's just existence. So if all of your needs are met and you're being properly supported and you're in a good community that allows you to be yourself and supports you, then you can thrive. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for families as a whole to be able to thrive as autistic families. And then you can learn job skills, you can learn, life skills and things like that because they are actually being supported.
So I'm going to have you break it down for me a little bit more here, because just hearing this for the first time, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. So you have the base level, and it's not just your basic needs. Like you still need, food, water, shelter, those things. But you're saying that doesn't come first. Why not?
It does not.
No.
In neurotypicals, physical comes before mental, but for neurodivergence, mental comes before physical, such as hyperfocus, where we can concentrate on a project for days at a time, but forget to eat. And so we will actually physically run ourselves into the ground trying to take mental care or mental focus, working on special projects. It also means they avoid a lot of physical discomfort and they act from extreme autonomy. They also don't have this child versus adult hierarchy that most neurotypicals seem to have. They see themselves as equal, and so it's a human to human exchange instead of an adult versus a child, where um, usually neurotypicals will view children as less than, because we know more, we have more experience. But children on the spectrum, they will get diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance or oppositional defiance disorder, because they have such an extreme need for autonomy and for freedom, and seeing themselves as equal to their parent. A lot of parents will see that as a problem depending on what their parental approach is. And so that's where you start seeing some of the different approaches between neurotypical and neurodivergence, and why that translation of what's happening is so important.
So how do you get these base level needs met then? What are the steps in that?
Community support and family support, having a family that will check in on you and bring you snacks or make sure that you are getting fed at regular times, helping to remind you to take showers and self-care.
And that starts with education. The family cannot do that if they don't know that that's what they're supposed to do, or if that's even an option. They are not getting that kind of information on how to support them. And that is the other prong of what we are trying to do, is educate families on how to have that support so that there's balance throughout the family.
I could see an uneducated family being like, okay, this is an oppositional, defiant kid that's avoiding demands. They don't want to do any chores or anything, and they're very insistent on it. This is just a child that doesn't want to do what I tell them, and I'm upset about that. But it's actually deeper than that. You're saying for young people with autism.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and then you get into the fighting of the wills, and then nobody wins, and it just draws them, because they're unsupported, it just draws them further into themselves and out of reality and the present state. So it gets harder and harder to reach them because they're not supported and they feel attacked.
The other major difference between the neurotypical and the neurodivergent triangle is the self-actualization being at the bottom results in a very strong internal world. Whereas a lot of neurotypicals exist in the external world, people with autism have an internal world that they may forget about the external world. You have to draw them out of their own head, out of their own inner world, in order to interact with it. That's why they don't come when their name is called, or you have a hard time getting their attention, is they are so far inside of their own mind that they forget the external world exists. And that's also a major misconception and misunderstanding in the professional arena when it comes to autism.
So we support these young people, we make sure they're fed, that they're checking in with reality in the world, they're taking showers, you're being understanding. And then how do you move up this pyramid then?
Well, then you can, like I said, you can start teaching them, now that they're supported, they're not blocking so much information. So now you can hopefully teach them, life skills. You can start with tying their shoe. You can move on to, bathing yourself, depending on what level of autism they are. They can learn job skills. They can learn basic cooking skills, doing their laundry. Things that have multiple steps. Then you start at one step and we get that one step down, so they're also more regulated, which leads to less meltdowns, leads to less fighting. So it's a win-win situation that they can actually start absorbing information and start going up their pyramid and becoming a more whole person.
Something that families can do to help support them is to implement a sensory diet. Sensory input is really important for their emotional regulation. So it helps them achieve more peace and more calm and being able to mentally function a little bit throughout the day. What's a sensory diet? A sensory diet is playing with shaving cream, sitting in sand. It's cuddling in a nice cozy blanket. It's running. It's feeling the wind through your hair. It's swinging. It's hanging upside down. It's making sure that your kid is getting some sensory input that meets their emotional needs so that they're able to move through bad, negative emotions better, to label things.
But it's important, 0 demands. So if you're sitting there playing Play-Doh with them, a lot of parents, try to make it into a learning experience. Hey, do you want to do this? Hey, what if you do that? Or you want to play with this toy with it? Like, it's too much. They're trying to calm down. So if you want to play with them, just sit there and quietly play. Don't put demands on them. Don't be like, hey, why don't you play over here? Why don't you play on it like this? Why don't you just let them be? Make sure they're safe, have boundaries, and then just let them go.
And it seems like the sensory things are very important, or like if a child's acting up for whatever reason, it might just be their shirt's itchy and you don't realize, or that's at least what I've heard about people with
Yes.
autism, is the whole sensory side is like much bigger for
Yes.
them.
And it is, yes. And, meltdowns could be, they're an all day thing. So a lot of people think that something right then at that second triggered them, but really there was just something that was the last straw. They've been holding it in all day. Something happened earlier today. It's been a downward spiral, but you didn't notice. And so, we teach that meltdowns are actually, for the most part, preventable. And so we teach also how to recognize and prevent meltdowns, which helps with the family balance as well.
Give me 2 or 3 quick tips on how you can recognize meltdowns and stop them before they happen.
That's Allyx.
Resistance. So say they're usually a really good, you have cooperation, they like to do things with you, but then they start resisting. They'll refuse to go into a certain store, or they will refuse to do something. And a lot of parents will view that as what? Disobedience, or, that ODD or PDA, that they're just resisting to resist. When in reality, it's because that store, the ceiling makes them feel sick to their stomach, or that the lights hurt their eyes, or that the refrigerators have a hum that hurt their ears. So one of the things that you can do is explore the resistance. Where is the resistance coming from? And making sure that they are taken care of before you're forcing them into a situation where they are going to have a meltdown from too much sensory input, because too much sensory input also leads to mental unwellness and meltdowns. So trying to and if you see that they're starting to become really, like, I don't know, what's a good word for it? Amped up. They get excited.
Yeah. I mean, you know your kid, when they're kind of
yeah.
What are
out of
their warning
sorts.
signs?
Yeah,
Right.
right before a meltdown, there will be something that you will have. I've heard, and I tested it this week with a couple of clients. So, popping a sour candy will help deter and interrupt a meltdown, or a panic attack, or something like that.
Kind of like all the sensory things go, oh, what is that? And then they
Yes,
forget that they were kind of freaking out.
yes. So it definitely interrupts that. And then to help them put less sensory input. So if we were in a store and my child started being like, man, I need a break, I need a break. We actually had a blanket that I would then throw over his head, and he would just stand in the store with a blanket over his head for only a few minutes. And then he was like, okay, now I can keep going. So it's just allowing them to have breaks and reprieve from sensory input while you're out and about, is one way to prevent meltdowns.
If you have a busy day, even things that don't involve them, but you're taking them on errands, place to place to place, and then maybe a couple hours of therapy, and then their brother's soccer game, and then like there was no breaks in there for them to just, like, sitting in the car is not a break. So somewhere in your busy day, they have to have breaks to re-regulate. And that's another big thing.
So, and the third tip would be to have a to-go bag. Always have a to-go bag with an extra change of clothes, their favorite sensory toys, a couple of activities, um, any first aid kit or something with them. If they have a favorite stuffy, if they have a favorite book, if they have you're packing with you everything you need to prevent a meltdown, have a to-go bag, have snacks, have water, have anything you might need throughout the day, because you don't know what you're going to face throughout the day. So always be ready.
Life has so many expectations on how you behave in public, and there's this idea of masking. What is masking?
So, whether you're autistic or neurodivergent or not, you still know that you're different. Like, you can sense it. People treat you differently. You're like, why am I so weird? And so you kind of go through life trying to fit in and trying to not be weird. So you kind of watch the people that you look up to, that other people respond well to. And you're kind of like, okay, how are they acting? Even if you're an introvert, they're like, oh, they come into a room and they're greeting everybody. So you come into a room and you start greeting everybody. You kind of start being a copy of these people that you feel are normal so that you can act normal. And it often doesn't help, because it kind of comes off as disingenuous, because it's not you, right? So people are still like, what is your problem? Why are you so weird? And it also is exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. It takes a lot of concentration. It's not something we really are aware of, but we're aware of just trying really hard to just sit there and not, say something or interrupt them. Or I find myself just being quiet so that I don't say something weird if I'm not around my people. So I'll just sit there and just like be quiet. And, if asked, I'll just say like a couple sentences just to keep it safe. And I'll just, not have big emotions or, laugh really loud. Like, you just kind of try to make yourself smaller. And it's really, really exhausting.
I had a client describe masking as all the shoulds in your life. That every masking is just this idea of what you should be. So you get this idea of what normal is, and then masking is what normal should be in your brain and what people have told you. Because normally our parents are normal, neurotypical, and our neurotypical parents are telling us how we should be. And when that doesn't line up with what we think we should be, there's this disagreement between the parents and the kids. And so masking is exhausting. And so you have to do it at home with your own parents, with your own family, because they find your behavior weird or they don't accept your autism.
There's no break.
There's no break.
How heartbreaking. Just letting your kids be their weird selves at home just seems like such a just a little break from it. Seems so important.
Yeah.
Part of the holistic family approach is we also talk with the parents about adjusting home living like they have a person with autism in the house. If our child was in a wheelchair, we would be putting in ramps. We would be moving walls to make doorways wider. We would be accommodating the house and changing the house to accommodate the child. And I feel like autism is the only one, because they look normal. There's no visual cue of disability, that then that neurotypicals have cognitive dissonance about why they're not behaving like a neurotypical, and that confuses them in the interaction. So a lot of parents will try to make the child with autism adjust to the house instead of adjusting the house to the child with autism. For my child, he had a lot of sensory input needs, and he loved to just smack into the wall at 100 miles per hour. He would get as high as he can and jump off just to pound the floor. And I literally had to put padding everywhere in my house from the waist down because my toddler would just run into the wall. And
All your fragiles away. And just, it didn't look like a typical house. And that's the thing, is you have to kind of let go of having the Better Homes and Gardens house
at
and
least
make
for
it
a
so that
bit.
everybody can live in there equally, you know?
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting us. We were so happy to be here.
Thank you for having us. It was great talking about autism with you today.
Thank you, Cheryl and Allyx. So much information, and it was a lot of fun talking with you. This has been The Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I'm Bobby Williams. We'll see you next episode. Peace.